Thank you for tuning in to the Peoplz and Dragons. If you enjoy the content we provide, then subscribe, like, and maybe join in on the action at www.pndrpg.com.
Haven City, an ugly city. Episode 2. Gray. Some time ago, a luxury aircraft host to explorers, doctors, and archaeologists cruise across the Sea of Clouds, departing the Oceania 1000 Islands, and are headed back toward Haven City. Eden Hargrave counts and organizes his new trinkets and artifacts recently obtained from his excursion and places them safely in his bag, then in his cabin's secure safe. Eden excludes a particular amulet and keeps this one in his hand as he seals and locks the others away. Eden holds the amulet up. It was what he came to the islands for. His investigation into the strange paranormal events in Haven have led him to acquiring this amulet that will assist in locating the source. Eden places it around his neck and heads out of his room to spend the rest of the evening socializing with well-traveled company. We cut to a small congregation of dapper and well-dressed explorers talking about their discoveries and artifacts. Amongst them, Eden, who always intrigued the curious types with his looks and jewelry. Perhaps the extra dark eyeliner added mystery. An explorer holds up a cane in the air. Its wood finish looked majestic and glowed with a tint of green. He tells a captivating story about how he obtained it to the group, and they applaud and stare in awe. All except Eden, who is hardly impressed. He eyes it as a sturdy cane, but the enchantment was nothing to shake a wand at. The explorer is offended by Eden's lack of excitement and puts him on the spot. You, sir, what have you come upon in your travels other than Solian trinkets? Everyone turns to Eden. Eden has always had an interest and love for all things supernatural, magical, and occult in nature. This always led to odd discussion topics and revelations for those who converse with him. Eden smiles and pulls out a hoop made of bone. Eden explains that it is a penile piercing of an overlord incubus he pulled from a possessed Dorinthian diplomat turned sleepwalking serial murderer. It blesses its wielder with protection from the common cold, cancer, and sexually transmitted diseases. Eden staggers the crowd, some looking interested, others utterly disgusted. He uses this moment to take his leave toward the balcony of the ship for some fresh air. He spots a passenger that looks out of place. Leaning on the balcony, staring out into the clouds, we see a lean, broad-shouldered island girl. Eden knew she was an islander just by the shell decor on her bag. And she was barefoot. Her thick legs toned by the Oceania martial arts. Eden approaches and introduces himself. She moves her long black curly hair to the side, revealing dark slanted eyes, startled. Epony smiles and greets him in return. She immediately recognizes one of his bracelets and goes to ask him if it was what she think it was. Well, what do you think it is? The bracelet worn by the adversary of your Lord and Savior during the 7th War of Islands? It is. Epony was quite scholarly when it came to her tribe's ancestors being the daughter of a chieftain. She tells him that they did a remarkable job replicating it. Eden knows that she doesn't believe him and finds it quite funny because if it really was what she thought it was and what it is, she would be technically obligated to take it from him. The two begin to conversate about their goals and experiences in life. We learn that in order to prove to her father that she is a fit leader, she will prove it by surviving in Haven alone, in the city of darkness, a megalopolis of chaos and destruction. Ebony's posture becomes more mighty and she points her chin toward the direction of Haven City fearlessly. Nature isn't darkness because nature is pure and neutral. My presence will restore some balance. Eden was well versed in Oceania beliefs, and what she says has truth. It sounds great, but she is naive to Haven's diverse belief systems that also have truth to them. A large crowd of passengers on board crowd around a hollow screen displaying breaking Haven news. Live camera footage can be seen hovering around Myra Dare being hung out in front of the city. The news anchor states that the woman is unidentified with no record on file anywhere. Suddenly, Anarchy 12 takes over the feed and has a few words for the Gate Center and the Survey Day, daring them to come save their own. Then the screens cut to the tortured Myra and remains there indefinitely on every channel. Eden turns and sees Ebony watching in shock. If you're not careful, that could be you in a few weeks, Eden teases. Ebony is not intimidated in the slightest. However, the technology, that was a bit overwhelming, and to see it used for harm was rattling. Ebony's moment of self-doubt passes and she smiles at the challenge while picking up her bag. Eden and Ebony say farewell to each other and depart as their flight arrives to their destination. We cut to Eden getting settled in his driver's seat. Vacation's over, and starts his car. Present time. We see and hear Eden breathing hard, adrenaline rushing while sporadically peering into his rearview mirror. Several motorcycles can be seen trailing, all of his assailants wielding guns. Eden turns to the young pioneer in his passenger seat and frantically asks, "Who is that woman back there?" Kay McVeigh is slouched in his seat, experiencing abyssal jet lag and trying to recover. Imagine the feeling of an anxiety attack and feeling like you must manually inhale and exhale, but 10 times worse. Eden reaches into his coat, retrieves a vial of oil and tells Kay to sip some. It would make him feel much better. Kay refuses it and pulls himself up in his seat. Eden couldn't believe an actual pioneer was beside him. They were pretty much the G.I. Joes of the occult lexicon and thought to have been wiped out during the extermination. Kay ignores all of his questions and gathers his composure. Eden makes a sudden left, then a right, then left and another right and onto a highway exit. Eden asks Kay if he knows anything about her medallions that she was wearing. Is that how she captured you, maybe? Kay opens one eye in discomfort and glares at Eden in frustration. Three massive 6-wheel trucks pull up to a shady establishment deep in the heart of District 9. It was obscured and heavily guarded. The black tenant window rolls down, and through it we see Dravko's glowing and terrifying draconic eyes peering out at the location called the Lap of Soak, a prominent location for major underground dealings and a multi-billion-dollar fight club that nets a little less bizquirks than Dimension Ball. Dravko steps out of his truck, fully cloaked to hide his physical features. He was accompanied by 8 criminal goons that he broke out of Max. Each of them were incredibly infamous crime lords themselves, but now they sit at Drav's table. They didn't even need guards. They all were their own protection and walked toward the venue. We cut to Dravko with his entourage in a dim-lit corner. The entire interior had dozens of private sections carved into the walls where many crime bosses and important figures sit away from the common riffraff as everyone spectates the festivities. Two skilled combatants go at it in the middle of the ring, blood flying everywhere. One leg sweeps the other and jams his knee into the other's neck, crushing his throat, killing him dead. Dravko puffs his cigar as the waitress places more food on the table. For the most part, this place was the same as he remembered it to be. This fight club used to be owned by the same man who took in and adopted a young and lost Dravko Mas. The instigator purposely gave a small percentage of G-types the physical features of their mutation before they awaken. This left Dravko Mas with draconic features, which were surprisingly horrifying even in a world of post-op centaurs and fish surgery. Dravko was just frightening and thus was perceived differently. Neelam raised him around the deep slum's most infamous goons, kingpins, and combatants. The environment gave him the mindset and the martial combat prowess to match. Every day, Dravko was a prosperous student to the art of boss moves. Until one night, law enforcement bombarded the club and aired out the entire place, killing Neelam in the process. Drav was so calloused by then that this did not impact him too much. However, he made sure to have those responsible for that obvious hit job sewn up within days of it happening. Drav then went on to other lucrative endeavors but would continue to visit this place because Fight Club was what he was brought up on. He also loved what the Wang Gang has done with the place since taking it over. We cut to the center of the club in a crowd-formed fighting area. Wang Gang members pushed their way through a chanting and wild crowd to retrieve the loser's body. The Lang Dao of the Wang Gang stands up from his chair and steps up to the balcony overseeing the arena, lit by the spotlight. Standing before them all was Noxious Wong, leader of the Wang Gang, Haven's most terrorizing gang and self-proclaimed God King. Newcomers to the lap of Soak thought it was all rumors until they witnessed the ritual take place. Wang Gang goons grab the lifeless corpse as well as the combatant's manager and tosses them into a raging oven that sits under Noxious Wong's section as a sacrifice to him. Noxious Wong smiles and raises his hands for praise. The spectators cheer as his sinister cat toxin slithers around his feet. Dravko and his goons laugh and applaud with the rest of those watching. We even see Ivan Bakara draped in shadow, lurking about, applauding, then proceeds to take a shot off of someone's table and downs it. Dravko Mas wasn't here for just a show, however. Drav looks at the time and sees that it's almost Grenfall. He figured if he was going to build a criminal empire for the new world, he wanted only the best G-type criminals under his command. If he was going to recruit anywhere, it'd be where the wild things are. His eyes set on the Wang Gang in particular. Any moment, chaos and bloodshed will fill this venue, more so than usual. Drav calls into Nam. It rings. And it rings some more. And then she picks up at the last moment. We cut to Nam Ki and Deftude stepping out of a pocket dimension and onto a roof of a building. Deftude rolls out Resonoc's rehabilitation pod and it lands heavy. Under them just happens to be the headquarters of the Brass Knuckles gang. Their leader is playing pool when a loud thump from above sends particles dropping onto the pool table. He stops, looks up, then tells his men to clear the birds off of his roof. Several armed thugs head up. Deftude presses buttons on the rehabilitation pod containing Resonoc, who sits inside, waiting. Deftude informs Nam that this is the precise location below, where Grenfall will appear above. He asks her to stand guard while he prepares Resonoc for his true function. Nam Ki nods, when suddenly, a brass knuckler shouts out asking who they are. Nam and Deftude turns to them. Deftude, unworried, focuses back on the pod. The brass knuck feels disrespected and fires his gun, sending a bullet at Nam, who deflects it from her face with the bangles on her wrist. 10 brass knucklers armed with knuckle gear and guns begin to move in. Nam stands stoic and calm as a goon charges and throws a punch. Nam sidesteps it and throws 12 machine gun punches, breaking all of his ribs, then dips under another attacker's swing and sends an uppercutting wrist strike as her metal bangle breaks his jaw. She then grabs his body to use as a body shield as it soaks up 2 gunshots. Then she backflips and launches herself off of the first attacker, kneeling in the ground, coughing up his ribs. Nam throws herself into 3 more attackers, leading with a flying kick that snaps her target's neck. An attacker strikes her, but she catches his fist, reaches under and breaks his arm, then sends a punch into his stomach, causing stomach matter to explode from within his mouth. She then spins and deflects an incoming punch with her leg, then completes another revolution with the roundhouse kick that crushes their skull in. A more skillful fighter lands a blow to her face, but she catches their next strike within her bangles, locks up his hand, and then sends a flurry of kicks into his body with bone-crushing, shattering impact, then deflects the next incoming bullet into his head, then another bullet into the goon approaching Deftude, killing them both. Deftude finalizes Rez's mental configuration. He peers into the glass and sees a fiendish Rezanok with eyes glowing red. Nam ignites her left arm in golden nuclear flames while somersaulting over her target's head and comes down on his skull with an elbow, breaking his head into 2, like a melon. A shooter runs up close range and begins to unload his clip point blank. But Nam sidesteps the first bullet, deflects the second bullet into his belly, third into his thigh, fourth into his chest. Then she grabs his wrist and sets him ablaze and tosses him off the roof. Nam sets her gold and lavender eyes on the last brass knuck. He looks, then turns to run, but before he could get far, Nam launches forward with a flying knee that connects with the back of his neck, killing him. Nam stands and dusts herself off. Heart rate hasn't increased in the slightest. She continues to monitor their surroundings, when suddenly, a massive block of metal engulfed in green flames and Takena energy appears in the sky above them like a ship exiting warp speed. It had to have been the size of 3 districts, nearly blocking out the sky. Deftude opens the pod hatch and pulls Rezanok from out of it and points Rezanok's face toward the sky while holding his eyelids open. An entranced Rezanok begins to come to his senses and gets stimulated by the massive bulk of data above him. Through his analytical eyes, it was like staring into a buffet after not eating for weeks. Nam can see the otherworldly instincts coming out of Rezanok. He wasn't himself. Or was this the true being, kidnapped from outer space? Nam looks up at Grenfall. From his ship's window, Tempus watches Grenfall appear, just how he foresaw, a bit bigger than he expected though. Tempus calls and gives orders to several gate agent squads strategically placed around the city. We see Jeremiah looking through his battlefield helmet at the massive rock, his helmet display going haywire and suggesting to take underground shelter. But Jeremiah trusted Tempus more than his own technology. If Tempus said it will appear and explode over Haven, then he'll trust his vision. Jeremiah's bodyguards look weary though. We see Epony walking through Divergent with her bag on her back when she stops to look up to see what's blocking out the sun. We see Shiro, Looper, and Void Mackay watching a live feed from Shiro's citywide surveillance grid. Androids can be seen forming barricades, securing sectors, and neutralizing erratic behaving bystanders who attack them, but are commanded to allow civilians to attack each other, perpetuating a survive or die environment. The Survey Day begin to regroup and pull back from their raid as more and more gate agents begin to mobilize and secure their respective areas. As expected, civilians begin to panic and chaos ensues. Shiro states that they need to get to the scene as soon as possible and cannot rely on gate mutants to save anyone without hurting someone at least. Makai steps in and defends Tempus in the gate center. He tells Shiro and Looper both about everything Tempus has done for the city. Looper calls bullshit and points out that we all saw what your so-called allies did to you. It almost started a war, and it put you in another man's body. Looper twirls his constable baton and starts poking at Makai in the nipple with it. Are your allies really your allies if the result of your friendships put you in another man's body with another man's dead nipples? Makai grabs his baton and moves it away from himself. Tension builds between him and Looper, but Shiro intervenes and gets them to focus on the urgent matter at hand. Flash forward, we cut to Looper's car, barreling out of Shiro's hidden garage exit, followed by Shiro on his hover bike, both headed toward the chaos. Above them, heading in the same direction, we see Makai, standing on the back of his chi dragon, cruising across the sky in a plume of purple chi flames. Anarchy sits across the table from Mistress Scorn, his android eyes scanning her and processing observations. Mistress Scorn continues. She explains that she and the pirates accompanying her have traveled across galaxies in pursuit of the instigator. Anarchy is intrigued by the mention of galaxies and space travel, a concept suppressed and kept from him his entire life, and has become more familiar with these the past few days. Anarchy asks what they require him for. Mr. Scorn says so that the madman can receive his proper trial and subsequent punishment for his transgressions committed against you artificial life forms created within this matrix, as well as the other heinous experiments facilitated elsewhere in the stars by him and his cohorts. Anarchy 12's gears turn in his head. Mr. Scorn reads his body language and adds that she can wait until he has no further need for him. Anarchy 12 brings up a display of the instigator bound and suspended in his chamber. Mistress watches the instigator through the feed, impressed at how Anarchy was able to subdue the Master Lich. She asks Anarchy if he is sure that's really him. Confused by the odd question, he replies, of course. Mistress Scorn then peers around the room at the different machines and androids and determines that Anarchy is as dangerous as her informant said. Anarchy asks what he would receive in return for handing over the galaxy's most wanted criminal. The mistress responds by informing him of her knowledge of powerful factions and entities that govern the wider universe. She suggests that if he assists and doesn't obstruct justice, these connections and contacts may be of use once he is freed from the tank and the instigator's manipulation. Anarchy 12 begins to consider this heavily. The thought of connections intrigued him. Mistress Scorn then offers to be an ambassador for him to the wider universe and offers him her aid and knowledge into making his planet a new and independent planet, despite its artificial origin. There are many colonies and space stations out there that could benefit from your technology and advanced civilization, Anarchy. She then signals to her informant, Doug, who opens up a display of the endless colonies, planets, factions, and government powers existing in the galactic expanse. The path to power and influence in the universe can be treacherous if you don't know where to step, she whispers. Her silky words glide across the table, their appeal amplified once they reach him. Anarchy gets ready to speak when he notices a mist lingering around his nose. Mr. Scorn then also realizes she has been breathing in a mysterious and fine mist, saturating the room. We cut to Myra Dare, standing in a control room, standing around destroyed androids. She takes a deep breath as knowledge of how to operate the control system floods her mind, just as her mist now floods the entirety of Anarchy's base. With a few button presses, Myra unlocks and unleashes the entire sector of gamma types captured from the previous cycle. We see Smart Marta, another prisoner and victim to the destructive experiments done on her brain. The gold gamma nullifier band on her only arm deactivates and falls from her wrist. We see yellow numbers and equations start to materialize and form her infamous arm. Smart Marta walks out into a battle zone as powerful G-types engage with android guards and attempts to break free from Anarchy's hell. We see a large, heavy-set man flying down the cell block telekinetically, ripping the communication cores straight out of the androids' bodies, causing them to go haywire and malfunction. Another G-type can be seen swinging around a large scythe made of their own blood as bullets pass through them in their blood form. The same bullets are then redirected by a magnetic, gravity-manipulating G-type who turns all of the bullets into a magnet that pulls in every android to it, disabling them. Smart Marta comes running out of her cell and leaps off of the balcony, her arm of numbers growing twice her size as she pulls her fist back while flying toward the horde of bound androids. She then delivers a massive and destructive blow that wrecks a great majority of the androids with an explosion of numbers reflecting the amount of damage caused, appearing over their heads as they begin to explode and shatter into pieces. The blood manipulator is delusional, and in a frenzy, he brings his scythe across the heads of several other G-types that were defending him, severing their heads off, all except one who manages to grow their head back in an instant. She tries to get through to the blood manipulator, but he doesn't listen and continues to attack, but is frozen in his tracks, then demolished by Smart Marta, who comes flying from above with the hammering fist. Smart Marta, though slightly not all there herself, encourages other escapees to work together to flee this prison. Anarchy sees all of this and dismisses the visual. He turns to Mistress Scorn and asks her to stand by as he handles some matters. He then has an android bring her food and drink based off of what his Gorgon detected was the last thing that she ate. Mistress Scorn accepts the offer and makes herself comfortable. We cut to Smart Marta and an army of Alpha G-types working together to get through each sector of android guards. Combined, their power too overwhelming within the supposed nullified zone. Smart Marta leads them through when she looks up and sees Anarchy 12 standing above her in a doorway in his exosuit, as black as the void of space, with emerald green mechanical limbs aligned on the exterior of his own arms and legs. His suit was the pinnacle of his robotics ability. Anarchy 12 looks down on them with his cowboy hat, points his finger at the escapees, and says, "Reach for the sky." When suddenly, approaching from behind them, appears 3 men, 2 in trench coats and 1 old, robed man. The desperado, the outlaw, and the priest. A G-type turns around and without hesitation prepares to blast a psychic wave from his eyes, but as soon as they start glowing, the outlaw in one lightning-fast maneuver pulls out and fans the hammer, sending a barrage of bullets from its revolver into his face, blowing his head clear off. Smart Marta directs G-types to take care of them while her and the others go for Anarchy 12. The flying G-type lifts Smart Marta into the air with him to take on Anarchy 12 and drops her off at the 3rd level, then proceeds to attack with his telekinesis when a laser-tipped arrow flies true, penetrating halfway into his collar. Then another arrow through his gut, causing him to spin out of control. An android resembling an Apache Indian leaps up toward the flying heavyset G-type in midair and mounts onto him. The G-type panics as the glowing red-eyed mohawked assailant winds its laser tomahawk back and sends it smashing into his fat neck, cutting into it like butter. The The laser blade on the Apache's axe then transforms and begins to saw into the rest of his neck into a full and gruesome beheading, taking down the flying G-type like a wild fucking animal. It then leaps off of the falling G-type, ripping the arrow out of the dead man's gut and firing it at another G-type, kicking at the outlaw. The laser arrow zips through the air, shooting off the G-type's fist. The outlaw uses this opportunity and sends 3 high-caliber rounds up her side, the third bullet flying between the ribs, hitting her square in the heart. The outlaw then spins its revolver, loads it with a silver bullet, and takes out the G-type with the weakness to silver, as detected by the priests, whose dead eyes we see zipping across the room at lightning speeds, analyzing everything. It looked like a possessed old pilgrim. Marta sees this but knows that if she can take out Anarchy 12, it should disrupt the others. But she'd be wrong in underestimating Anarchy's genius robotics intellect and the ability to craft something capable of ruling the city even after he were dead. The peacekeepers are why the gate agents lay low and don't disrupt natural selection. Marta charges toward Anarchy, her arm of numbers growing more powerful. Anarchy 12 calmly awaits her. Smarta leaps at him for the attack, but crashes into a barrier of sonic waves that causes her eardrums to explode and scrambles her brain so much so that she can no longer concentrate on the calculations and formulas in her head, causing her number arm to dissipate. She drops to her knees, holding her bleeding ears. A spike of ice is hurled toward Anarchy from another G-type, but it is melted upon reaching him as his suit begins to generate volcanic temperatures. Anarchy shoots a steel pellet from his finger like a bullet that penetrates the ice G-type's face even in ice form. The pellet then releases a fine mist that Anarchy reversed engineered from Myra. A mist so fine and thin that it could carry his nano-sized swarm bots that begin to spread into the cracks of his ice head and explodes his whole body, even taking out the G-type next to him. Anarchy stands in front of an incapacitated Smart Marta. He then activates the calculator he implanted in her brain and operates her arm of numbers for her. He forces her to wrap it around her neck like a lasso, then has it yank her off of the 3rd floor just to capture the ledge and hang herself. A brolic G-type charges toward the Desperado and the outlaw, while impervious to their gunfire. Just as the G-type goes to clobber the outlaw, the priest generates a shield that protects the outlaw, rendering it untouched. The Desperado unsheathes 2 katanas using its 2 extra arms under its trench coat and plunges one through a detected soft spot of the G-type, which was just up under its jaw, through his mouth and head, killing him dead. It then discards the body and cuts down 3 G-types fighting it at once, then gets 4 headshots off of G-types approaching the priest again. A cat-like G-type with super insane speed and razor-sharp claws begins zigzagging and closing in acrobatically. The Desperado then begins to rapid-fire both of its revolvers while slicing the bullets on their way out, causing wide-area bullet spray that peppers the speedy foe, sending her tripping forward into being diced in half by the Desperado's katana, who then spins and tosses its katana 10 yards away into the neck of another G-type, then magnetically calls it back into its hand and under its cloak. Both arms go back under when no one is left in reach. From the other end, the Apache leaps into the fray and begins hacking the rest all up like a laser cyclone of death. Anarchy watches proudly as his new set, the peacekeepers, clean up the mess for him. He got everything he needed from them anyway. We cut to the instigator's chambers. Myra tiptoes in, closing the door behind her to silence the chaos and destruction heard from the jailbreak. Myra looks up and sees the instigator bound and tortured like she was. The instigator, already privy to her objective, tells her to get on with it. Myra deactivates the brain-numbing minefield, freeing the instigator's mind. The instigator feels his thoughts settle and begin to make sense again. At last, the instigator can tap into his supremacy of the arcane knowledge. He closes his eyes, triggering a great and fiery explosion from around him, incinerating the cables and devices and anything foreign plugged into him, breaking him free of his bonds as he falls from high up, landing on a platform of air that slows his descent into a graceful plop. The ultra-thin and translucent body of the instigator stands upright. His long white hair gains its volume back and his flesh returns to its normal pale white. He clenches his fists and wiggles his fingers and looks at Myra. He identifies the augmentation invigorating her. The instigator reaches his hand out as if calling something, and sure enough, the instigator's heavy Magitech armor comes bursting through the walls at such an immense velocity that not even the walls of Anarchy's fortress can withstand the force of its power. His bulky armor slams into his palm. Along with it, 2 androids that were carrying it. With a stroke of his hand, a sharp and destructive bolt of raw lightning zips into them, frying them in a matter of seconds, leaving a heap of machinery. The technologically advanced armor cuirass fits itself onto him magically, generating a vibrant green aura of Takena around him. Myra tells him that she has come to free him and escape. Myra has become attuned to the Takena fully and can sense immense power from within the instigator. She warns him that everything here is machinery. There are no souls to fuel our Takena. The instigator laughs. Our Takena. This is no Takena, child. The instigator claps his hands together softly, causing a massive hole boring through every single wall they stand in front of. Everything in the path of he and his ship had been completely and utterly disintegrated. The instigator, accompanied by Myra, make their way to his ship. The two are met with waves of gunfire from both sides as they march straight, protected by a mighty magic barrier that made them invisible, but still detected by Anarchy's androids and base defenses. Large turrets emerge from the walls they pass by and begin rapidly firing large energy beams, but are met with a barrage of bolts of raw magic that split their beams in half and rip into the turrets. These arcane beams spout from the instigator's hands as he marches palm up toward his ship. Suddenly, the big tank of an android, the bartender, steps into their path, but the instigator keeps walking, paying it no mind. The bartender's fist comes crashing down onto the instigator's barrier, shattering it. Soon after, a grenade dispenses into the bartender's palm and then crushes it with its hands, causing an explosion in the face of the instigator. Suddenly, before the smoke even clears, the bartender is lifted into the air as the instigator carves a hole in the wall and tosses the bartender out of the building and out of their way, while protecting him and Myra from the base's defenses. Myra dashes ahead and takes out an android operating the port controls, releasing the instigator's ship. At this point, base defenses are barraging the instigator but fail to penetrate his supremacy. Myra, with her newfound computer skills, searches through the console to discover what they discovered about this ship. It took a minute, but eventually she learns how to operate the instigator's ship. She somersaults toward and into the ship while avoiding being shot. The instigator waves one hand while speaking words inaudible due to the terrible sounds coming from the spell's manifestation. Suddenly, large sections of the base where enemies are present begin to explode, destroying everything in its radius. The instigator's deadly and efficient spells was the only thing that could get them out of Anarchy's base. Myra calls for him to get on as she brings it around with the hatch open. The instigator walks over to it, and just before stepping into it, he has his armor produce what looks like a fetus-like seed that he retrieves and imbues with Takena. He then drops it on the ground as it rapidly grows and morphs into a humanoid resembling a younger version of himself, but with little to no acute features. The Takena husk lays lifeless on the ground. The instigator looks up one last time at Anarchy's fortress, then turns away into his ship and flies off. Myra pilots his ship with ease avoiding base defenses and escaping into the sky. Moments later, Anarchy 12 and Mistress Scorn arrived to the port where the instigator last was. The ship was gone. Anarchy and Mistress Scorn then approached the Takena husk left behind by the instigator, when suddenly, an unseen force possesses the instigator's husk of a clone. It brings itself to one knee, then swings its white, long, scraggly hair back and glares at Anarchy and Mistress Scorn, smiling. Mistress Scorn informs Anarchy it's a clone possessed by the instigator's brother. Anarchy regrets not tearing further into his past. The clone stands up.
One day you will hang from the light poles in your own cables, Anarchy, and I will then parade your body around like casual pajamas.
Anarchy turns to look at Mistress Scorn. She tells him that there's no point in capturing it unless you can capture souls. The facilitator has been taunting them in their chase of the instigator for years now. The facilitator has carried out many atrocities on behalf of the instigator, but is nigh impossible to bring down. Anarchy turns back to the facilitator and warps onto his arm a mounted cannon equipped with spectral rounds created from reverse engineering one of the G-types he had caught from the last cycle. In a fraction of a second, Oracle determined that this is what's best for the situation and warps it onto his suit. Without hesitation, Anarchy fires a burst of spectral rounds into the facilitator, pumping its chest up and sending his soul flying out of the husk's body and out into the city. The facilitator, critically wounded, floats downward into the city toward the Shade District. The facilitator, invisible to everyone, leans up against a wall trying to weave a temporary illusion to heal its wounds. He's never felt this sensation before and realizes the spectral rounds have him bleeding plasma. He looks up and all around and notices dozens of Gorgon bots stealthily crawling around the city, tracking his paranormal blood trail. When suddenly, a terrible metallic screech can be heard from above. The facilitator looks up and sees the Wrath Chimera landing in the middle of the intersection in front of him, landing on top of vehicles and killing a few bystanders on impact. A car slams into its abominable metal body, and a person flies through the window, dead. The Wrath Chimera, built to hunt, turns and sets its gaze on the facilitator's general area. Anarchy 12 and Mistress Scorn both look disappointed for different reasons after the instigators slipped through their fingertips. That's when Grenfall appears in the sky. Anarchy 12 tells Mistress Scorn that now is the best opportunity to leave Haven because it's about to get dicey. Mistress Scorn shoots him a glare and teleports away. Doug, her informant, approaches Anarchy and hands him a card and tells him to stay in contact. Anarchy watches Doug exit the obliterated hangar. We cut to Eden speeding down the highway with a recovering Kay in the passenger. Eden looks into the mirror and sees no one tailing him. Suddenly, Selena Rend lands on the hood of his car, her menacing sharp smile peering through his windshield. Kay McVeigh sends his whip flying out to latch onto the light pole and swings the car off and over the highway overpass in hopes to fling Selena off of the car, but she holds on tight and punches through, shattering the windshield. I will empty your belly over the mouths of your children. And she proceeds to grab Eden by his collar, but Eden invokes a blast of concussive magic force and blows her back with his enchanted necklace. But she grabs onto his window ledge just as they land from off of the overpass and onto a rooftop. Kay's whip lashes around the window and strikes Selena in the face, tearing it, revealing her dead and abysmal flesh under her beauty. Eden whips the car off of the roof and back onto the road with Selena hanging on barely. Eden reaches out of the window and goes to blast a concussive wave from out of his enchanted ring, but Selena grabs his fist and disenchants every piece of jewelry on his arm and twists his wrist, breaking it, as she then holds him in place and sinks her teeth into his arm, biting through his coat, causing immense pain. Eden screams and loses control of the vehicle a bit. K. McVeigh leans over to readjust the wheel, then phases through the car onto the hood and lashes Selena, striking her again, forcing her to let go of Eden, who purposely drives into an oncoming vehicle, forcing Selena to leap off of their car, and begins running alongside the vehicle, on tops of cars parallel to them. Eden reaches into his glove compartment and pulls out a tome he prepared. He gets ready to invoke a spell, and then pokes his head up to find his target, but is met with a barrage of machine gun fire as 5 hoverbikes carrying Ivan's goons surround their vehicle. K. McVeigh fades in and out of ethereal form while whipping and lashing at Selena, who effortlessly keeps up on foot and trying desperately to derail them. Eden opens the driver's seat door and blasts Selena with a wave of dark power that hits Selena square in the torso, but is absorbed by one of her enchanted amulets. The impact still sends her flying into the 3rd floor window of a fancy clothing store. Eden winces from the coldness that shoots across his body. A costly spell with side effects. Eden feels 2 years of his life shed from off of his soul. 3 hoverbikers surround K, spraying at him but miss and fire into the hood of the vehicle and begin destroying the car. K. McVeigh wrangles one of the bikes flying above him and swings it into the other 2, knocking them off and violently swinging them into structures so fast they explode into goops of body matter on impact. Eden reaches up and takes hold of the wheel and crashes into the biker next to their vehicle, sending them flying off to their deaths, as K lashes at the biker, wrapping the Pioneer's whip around them and the bike, then releases a concussive explosion of force that blows them and the bike up. Selena can be seen running and breaking through the walls of the 3rd floor mall, keeping her eyes on them from above in the window. A giant arm of an abyssal demon comes reaching out of the middle of the street, acting as a bridge that Selena jumps out onto, catching up with their vehicle. Eden calls for K to take the wheel so he can prepare another spell before Selena catches up. A sea of abyssal arms of giants reaching through the abyss can be seen carrying Selena toward them. Suddenly, an abyssal creature comes phasing through the steering wheel, chomping at K, but K manages to strangle the creature with his whip while not losing control of the car. K. McVeigh considers leaving this entire situation, to be honest, as this man's life is not of his concern, but the least he can do is help him escape from the abyssal fiend, since Eden helped him escape from the abyss. K beckons Eden to hurry up with the spell. Eden fixes his gaze upon his tome and prepares to concentrate, but is distracted and amazed by what he sees sitting up in the sky. Grenfall appears. Rezanok pulls himself away from Deathtude, his fiendish alien instincts taking over. We see a cyclone of wind build up around his feet with enough force to blow Deathtude off of his feet and away. Rezanok shoots directly into the air, upward, leaving a trail of fire. Like a shooting star, Rezanok collides into Grenfall, causing a great internal explosion within the artificial structure. All of the past cycles of gamma mutation data is intercepted and absorbed, installed and patched into the genetically modified DNA of Rezanok. The fabric of his being is engulfed in glowing red light as he floats suspended in the air, as the gravitons of Grenfall's information orbit around his halo space. Several large chunks of Grenfall, still chock full of gamma radiation, fly off and plummet into the city, causing a small portion of Haven's inhabitants to mutate as expected. Deathtude stands in awe at his plans unfolding before him, his own secret weapon finally reaching its full potential and absorbing lifetimes of the instigator's work. Nam looks up and sees Rezanok hovering between Grenfall's metallic chunks as they fall to the city. Nam Ki looks around from over the roof and sees people all over, mutating and panicking. Explosions and vehicle accidents start occurring all over the city. Awakened G-types begin attacking one another, and bad people who gain mutations become the worst people. Luckily, gate agents begin to show up and begin saving civilians from their own confusion and fending off those who would harm another during this mutation period as instructed by Tempus. We cut to passengers on a bus looking out the window at all the chaos when suddenly their bus swerves and crashes because the driver's hands and feet become tree branches, triggering him to panic and crash the entire vehicle. With the bus on flames, we see an older man and passenger of the crashed bus wake up from his daze beside the bus. He pulls himself up to his feet, his janitor's uniform tattered and burnt from him putting the flames out on his shoulder. He hears people screaming to be freed. As a natural instinct, he goes and helps begin to pull trapped passengers from the bus heroically. He sits down a little girl with her parents when he hears two more people screaming for help. He darts back into the bus and sees two high school girls scared for their lives and trapped and tangled under one another. The janitor goes to grab them when suddenly the girl's eyeballs bulge out of her head as her hair turns into fire and her flesh into concrete. The flesh from her neck shoots out and melds with the other girl's back, pulling her into her own morphing and fleshy mass. The two girls were mass mutating. The janitor has never seen this before and begins to back up but trips over the bus seat, falling onto the ground. The abomination latches onto him and pulls him into it as he too begins to mass mutate and become one with the abomination. The onlookers he saved watch in fear as they hear their cries come from within the bus. Suddenly, another chunk of Grenfall crashes into the building nearby as a massive pile of debris topples and buries the bus. It's quiet for a while, until bursting out of the debris is a large mass of concrete and debris swirling around within a large sentient construct. The three victims of mass mutation have mutated into one gigantic G-type consisting of whatever it can make itself from the environment. Civilians in the district watch in disbelief and begin to flee in fear. The janitor still retains some of her memories, but the sensation of being fused with two others into this monster has left her feeling confused, disoriented, and in pain, flying into a berserking rage. The janitor begins to flail about, trying to adjust to her new body, like the many of those mutating are, and in the process begins destroying buildings and thus killing dozens in the streets below. Every portion of debris caused by its destruction gravitates toward her and is pulled into her shape, making her bigger, more powerful, and destructive. The janitor was a complete danger to herself as well as others.
Hello everyone, it is Anarchy 12, and I am interrupting your feed to thank all of our viewers and supporters. I'm certain that the Peoplz and Dragons directors have more in store, so if this entertains you, it would be wise to subscribe. If this doesn't suffice, there's more in the galaxy. Visit www.pndrpg.com. A special thanks to the patrons. You are our Alpha G-types.
Saoirse and Zuzis stand amongst their robed clan prepared for the mutation to occur. Giant chunks of Grenfall can be seen raining from the sky from all around them as they indeed begin to mutate. Saoirse watches as they change before her very eyes. The mutations vary. Some drop to their knees in agony from the physical changes. Others instantly recall and gain the natural instincts of their powers, like remembering you have the ability to flex a muscle. Zeus's entire perspective on three-dimensional travel suddenly changes when he regains the ability to teleport. He teleports in place just to make sure that what he was feeling was real. As always, a small portion of civilization becomes abominations. In fact, one of Saoirse's clanmates begins to mutate horribly. Saoirse approaches her poor sister, who cries out for her help. Saoirse's aura vitae bathes the victim in her light, restoring her genetics to how it should be and recalibrating her DNA, bringing her to normalcy. Saoirse's aura vitae was essentially the crossroads of every gamma type's DNA. The effect of her aura vitae was dependent upon her mood and could hurl life into an abysmal mutation or a blissful euphoria. She turns to the facility and leads her clan to it. Suddenly, bursting from the underground facility and towering over her and her people, we see the great and twistedly monstrous R-type abomination flailing its tendrils and deformed tumors around while ripping apart Survey-Day cultists. Saoirse wasn't expecting R-type to be freed from his stasis and braces herself. She commands Zeus to escape with the others. Saoirse's communion of souls place her and her people on the same wavelength of thinking, and without hesitation, Zeus grabs each clan member, two at a time, and teleports them away. A massive blob of the R-type abomination's cancerous tumors comes crashing down at Saoirse, but she manages to leap up and away, dive rolling into the snow. The R-type abomination fires a beam of blue energy at the approaching Survey-Day ships, alerted to the siege of the facility and blowing one of their ships right out of the sky. Pope Turner floats around the abomination, laughing and taunting it, trying to lead it toward Alta City, and is doing so with much success. We cut to the faces of three undead Survey-Day wardens. Their eyes open simultaneously, triggered by the siege of the instigator's facility that they have been tasked to guard. The wardens rise to their feet and slowly walk toward the edge of the Ghats Mountains, peering down from their tombs at the massive R-type abomination frenzying as the sky rains Grenfall debris. The towering abomination fires off dozens of energy beams, every which way, taking out all of the Survey-Day reinforcements, completely impervious to their artillery and magic. When suddenly, Saoirse appears from a pocket dimension directly in front of R-Type's half-mutated remains, dangling from the core of the abomination, and reaches out to grab his face with both of her hands, causing a bright explosion of light. Saoirse's aura vitae causes a nova of pure light that can be seen from space. Her aura of life energy ripples all the way through the abomination's ugly mass and penetrates through the necrotic underbelly of the cancerous source. Everything goes white. We cut to a distant shot of a massive crater formed by the explosion of light. As if sitting in the nosebleeds of a Dimension Ball stadium, we can make out two bodies laying toward the center. One begins to move and slowly crawl toward the other. Several minutes go by and we cut to Saoirse, who crawls beside a young R-Type X. Laid out, buried halfway under a mound of snow, his clothes tattered but his body in perfect shape, still glowing from the aura vitae, just as planned. Floating from above, out of sight of everyone, Pope Turner watches in shock at how quickly his shenanigans have been de-escalated, and like a spoiled teenager, his eyes begin to water in pure anger. Zeus teleports back onto the scene and drops from the air, landing in front of Saoirse and young Ryu. "You were successful, Sister Word." Saoirse turns to Zeus and shouts, "Look out!" Zeusis turns around in slow motion as a massive emerald claymore wielded by an 8-foot-tall Survey Warden comes swinging across Zeusis' midsection, severing him into 2 complete halves. But just as quickly as he is dissected, the Aura Vitae mends his body back together as the sword passes through. Zeusis, without hesitation, immediately teleports beside Saoirse, grabs her and teleports to a safer distance. The tall Survey Wardens, clad in highly advanced Survey armor, come walking in between Saoirse, Zeusis, and R-Type. The Wardens resembled old undead kings, with dried and frigid flesh courtesy of the climate and their age. Each wore thick ropes around their neck with many-sized hearts dangling from them. Gaudy frozen crowns sitting upon their snow-white hair with beards that reached their waist. When the winds blew, the beards went with it, making them appear as giant flags of fucking death. Poke Turner settles down and looks intrigued by the instigator's giant flunkies. Things didn't turn out so bad after all, he thinks. Sister Word, I may be able to grab the dragon, but we need to escape immediately afterwards, Zeusis says. He had an eye for the odds, and there were too many unknowns in this situation. Zeusis rubs his waistline, recalling the odd feeling of being cut in half for a few seconds. Saoirse gasps and points. Zeusis looks up and forward. The 3 Wardens turn to look behind them and see a young R-Type X standing upright, braving the strong winds, unmoved, breathing frantically. Spiritually unchained, R-Type's physical body is a cage hardly able to contain his raging spirit in Libra's experience. If it weren't for his physical body being imbued with Sister Word's Aura Vitae, he would explode like a sun. R-Type looks down at his own body, now a fraction of his stature and age. The confusion had him stunned. He looks up and sees the towering Wardens standing around him in a circle. Suddenly, he looks up and sees the towering Wardens appearing around him in a circle. The Warden grabs R-Type by his head and lifts his 12-year-old body up and begins to carry him back down into the ruined facility. But before the Warden could take his first step, R-Type's body flickers blue, and he bites into the Warden's hand and snatches him inward into a thunderous spinning kick. The kick sends the Warden stumbling backward, and his own crown flies off of his head. Before R-Type could even land from escaping his grip, the second Warden darts toward R-Type X at blazing speed with his blade extended. The R-Type powers up mid-air, taking in scattered particles of life, death, and nature, filling him with the pure spiritual power that creates a 10-yard explosion of dark blue energy the shape of a lotus bud, causing all of Haven to tremble. The Warden collides with this power, completely blowing its physical body backward while pulling in its death energy forward and completely destroying the Takena energy that gives it life. The Warden's body twists and contorts like glitchy ragdoll physics and is thrown into the air, landing yards away face first into the snow, annihilated. The first Warden regains its footing and zips back toward R-Type with a lunging elbow, but R-Type, still not touching the ground yet, flips over it. But the Warden's speed and reflexes enabled it to grab his ankle and slam R-Type into the ground, then lifts him back up out of the snow. The third Warden comes across with his blade, eviscerating R-Type in half. His torso and legs both turn into balls of energy and explode instantly as the real R-Type X blasts from under the second Warden, dual-wielding energy knives, and slices into him like a cyclone, cutting swaths away of his beard, flesh, and armor before charging up and causing another explosion of dark blue energy, blowing the Warden back, but not killing it, as it was being protected by the flat of its enormous blade. It then pulls a heart off of the rope around its neck and bites into it, causing a disproportionate amount of blood to blast out of it and gush out, painting the snow red. This triggers the warden to be filled with life and color, invigorating him as he begins to scream out of anger, when suddenly a beam of blue energy comes roaring across the snowy tundra, blowing a hole directly through the warden's chest, obliterating his necklace of hearts as the beam travels out the other end. The warden is swept off of his feet in slow motion as 3 more beams follow, passing through his belly, taking off his arm, then lastly his head. We cut to a young R-Type X standing there with a big grin and his fingers pointed like a gun. He then turns to the last warden, who appears beside R-Type, swinging his sword like a cyclone high and low. R-Type X ducks under it while flipping backward, then leaps over the next incoming swing, both moving swiftly across the tundra. The warden tosses his sword aside and puts both of his hands together and summons a Takena sword that floats and swings on its own. A sacred and unique Takena spell only the wardens utilized. The warden rushes toward R-Type X, swinging his Takena blade while blasting a myriad of destructive Takena spells, destroying the ground around R-Type as he evades and parries while moving backward, when finally R-Type X stops playing and grabs the Takena blade's edge with his bare hands. The Takena energy was inferior to R-Type's energetic physiology. The warden cannot believe its Takena blade is ineffective. R-Type X crushes the sword with his bare hands and starts beating his chest with the same hand cockily. The warden undoes his hands, calling off the Takena sword, and begins to try and reason with R-Type. But before he could say a word, R-Type's fist is smashed all the way into his face. It's almost as if time stopped, as we see R-Type's fist sitting in the warden's head. R-Type then comes across with another crushing blow, shattering the left side of the warden's head, then another blow, destroying the right. The warden stumbles backward, stunned by its head being mashed inward, and drops to its knee. Its one glassy green eye dazed, yet fixed on R-Type X, who lands in front of him. R-Type looks at his hands and feet, learning to appreciate his size. R-Type leaves the warden behind and begins walking away from it, as well as leaving Saoirse and Zeusis. R-Type tries to make sense of his predicament, as well as where to go, and most importantly, where he is. He takes another step when suddenly he feels a trembling shoot up his leg and immense pain, causing him to fall forward. R-Type X turns and looks at the warden, still on his knee, still incapacitated from its defeat. What was happening? If it wasn't the warden, what was it? R-Type's stomach begins to expand from being filled with tumors of ooze. R-Type begins choking and gasping for air as he slowly begins to mutate. In his agony, he looks at Saoirse and Zeusis, watching from afar. R-Type X places his hands on his leg. R-Type X places his hands on his leg in an attempt to blow it off and regenerate a new one, but the leg just mutates and latches back onto him and constricts his knees together until they snap, when suddenly Zeusis and Saoirse teleport in front of him, bringing her aura vitae into R-Type's presence. R-Type is immediately alleviated of the morphing and almost instantly returns to normal. R-Type X turns over onto his back, looking up at them. Saoirse knows the world is not what everyone may think it is. However, she also has a fragile grasp on reality and her own sanity, a dire result of her experimental G-Type 2 coding that was never patched. Saoirse was a bit more unplugged than the other G-Types. This allowed her to maneuver through this box. She wants out. She wants everyone out. Saoirse leans down closer to R-Type. He hasn't felt this type of warmth and comfort since being in his mother's presence. His lips go numb, his heart soothed. Saoirse asks Zeusis to take them to the others. Zeusis places his hand on her shoulder and slides his foot over to make contact with R-Type, Then all three blink away. We cut to Pope Turner, who seems to no longer have cared and fell asleep in his bubble. He wakes up when they blink away, and all he sees are the laid-out Survey Day wardens. Poke wasn't too mad that he missed it. He figured as long as he destroyed the key to the tank's commands, then no more cycles, and it's only chaos from here. Poke blinks away as well. Hundreds of varying-sized shards of alien metal that was Grenfall barraged many areas of the city, including the slum of slums, District 9. We see Dravko Maz and his goons in the back of the fight club, as the entire establishment rumbles and quakes. The sky was falling and no one knew what was going on outside, not even Ivan, who we see stalking someone in the shadows as people and tables begin to hit the floors. Skirmishes begin to break out, and soon after, gunfire. We cut to a crime boss sitting in a booth with two women surrounded by bodyguards. The guards defend the table from the raging pit of the district's most dangerous people. It was safer to remain in their section than wade through the room. Suddenly, pure shadow gushes out from under the crime lord's table, sending the food and wine glasses flying everywhere. The guards turn around, and everyone at the table looks up as Ivan Bakara slowly rises from the surface of the shadow-blanketed table. The guards draw their guns, but the crime lord calls them off. He and Ivan were well acquainted. He earned Ivan's acquaintance by being a valuable asset to his criminal network. Ivan crouches down and grabs a big piece of chicken and begins eating it.
If the Wang Gang ain't with us by tonight, then they die tonight. That's your deadline. Don't cross it.
Ivan then fades away like a ghost. The crime lord stands up and tells his guards to get him over to Noxious Wong. The guards look at each other like, are you serious? They both turn to the room, and we see pit fighters brutalizing each other, people getting stabbed and shot. Ones who did make it to the exit were ambushed. The 9 code was being violated all the way here. We see the Wang Gang holding up as a unit, fighting and killing with their headphones on, motivated by the looping war chants of their God King leader Noxious playing in them. The situation escalates when a good third of the criminals have a reaction to the Grenfall radiation, being flooded with their instinctual wisdom of their mutations. Those who were dangerous prior to their awakening have become even more deadly as their proficiencies are recalled. This was especially the case for Noxious, whose head begins to ache and burn. He sweats profusely, his tongue feeling like the engine within a hot air balloon. It isn't too far along before it clicks in Noxious's head of what it feels like he can do. A Wang Ganger dives in front of him to shield him and unloads his Uzi at an oncoming G1 impervious to the bullets. Noxious Wong turns around and throws his hands as if flicking water off of them, sending a fan of embers splashing into the attacker, sending them flying to the ground like a crisp wafer. Noxious looks down at his burning hands and smiles. The rest of the Wang Gang see this and are bolstered by the sight of the God King unleashing himself, finally. Noxious begins to set the entire room ablaze, killing and slaughtering every G-type attacking, defending, or fleeing. It was practice. Drav's draconic eyes dart around the room, observing every Gamma-type awakening and evolving into G-type ones in hopes for a G-type worthy enough to recruit. He sees G-types fighting for their survival, defending, but he also sees G-types being the aggressor and attacking everyone. Some catch his eye before being taken out by a more worthy opponent. However, no matter what happened, they eventually ended up being charbroiled when they crossed paths with Noxious Wong's flames. Much of the room is then cleared, and only some stragglers and half-dead victims crawling across the floor can be seen. We see Noxious Wong surrounded by his gang as they watch him grieve over the death of his closest partner. Noxious Wong places the corpse of his roasted cat, Toxin, and prepares to cremate it while trying not to shed a tear, when suddenly the crime lord from earlier crawls out of the cracks and shouts out Noxious's name. Noxious Wong turns and sees the man and his 2 guards standing with their guns out. "It's been a week, Noxious. I still have no answer from you, and you're not returning my inquiries." Maybe the crime lord wasn't as wise after all. Luckily, Noxious liked the idea of a criminal network. He leaves his cat's wake and walks up to the crime lord. His guards tense up as Nox and his gang approach. The crime lord wasn't scared of Noxious and sternly reminds him that the network has connections to deep places. Noxious stands before him and ponders, then extends his hand for a shake. The crime lord shakes his hand and tells Nox when and where to meet to discuss more matters. The world was shaking and he was standing before a demon, but the crime lord was more concerned about his deadline. Noxious turns and walks the other way, when a loud, slow clap can be heard echoing throughout the club over flames and moans of the injured. Noxious and the crime lord turn and see a cloaked Drav stomping on and over the bodies, followed by his goons.
That was a good show.
Drav walks slowly toward the crime lord while talking and looking at Noxious.
You were on fire, Noxious. Always have been.
The crime lord tells Drav to step back, and the guards point their guns. But Drav doesn't listen and continues to walk his way. But when he gets too close, the guards start to unload their bullets, but they bounce off of his hidden scales. Drav brings his massive hand down, chopping vertically into the crime lord's head, crushing it into his shoulders, dropping him dead. Before the guards could react, Drav's dragon-plated fists clobbers the guard on the left, breaking his face entirely, as his tail whips around, constricting the guard on the right's neck until it breaks. Noxious is surprised by the tail and wonders what kind of beast was under the cloak. The Wang gang run in front of their leader, ready to defend him, but Noxious keeps them back. Drav turns to Noxious, smearing blood on his cloak, before taking it off, revealing his dragon-like visage. Noxious always knew of Drav and his people, and intentionally stayed clear of him, but he had no clue why he always wore the cloak until now.
I've seen your work, Noxious. Or should I call you Soak now?
Drav points his finger at Nox's scorched hands.
You know you have crazy telekinetic abilities too, right? It might release the pressure in that head of yours.
Noxious wonders how he knows about his headache. Noxious begins to fan Drav with raging flames, but Drav walks through it. His scales scorched and white hot by the time he reaches Noxious, he throws a massive haymaker, knocking his ass out. A Wanganger jumps out and slashes at Drav with his laser sword, but takes a side kick to the body, sending him flying through a wall. Another steps in to attack Drav, but Drav pivots and stomps on his foot, crushing it, keeping him in place, then drives his fist into the Wanganger's gut, destroying his insides, killing him. Drav then spews a gout of acidic breath on the floor in front of the remainder of the gang as a warning.
You all get to make a very life-defining decision tonight. Wouldn't you rather wait until your God King makes his?
The Wangangers look at each other and disengage. Dravko makes eye contact with each and every one of them.
Fall in line.
We cut to a hatch that rests under the bed in Marshall Mace's apartment. The sound of destruction and panic can be heard outside. The hatch opens up and we see Marshall's blonde top peek out from it, scanning his room for any threats. We see Mason Mart employees and a few customers looking up the hatch for the signal that Marshall does not give. Instead, he tells them to wait, and he closes the hatch. Marshall, while still in his Happy Coyote Mason Mart mascot suit, peers out of his window to get a view of the outside. He sees a massive meteor being broken into pieces by a glowing red man in the sky, and mutating people being killed, captured, or both, by Anarchy's androids in the streets. It still hasn't completely registered to Marshall what was happening, as only a small amount of people were actually the recipient of radiation from Grenfall's shards. Marshall heads into his storefront attached to his home, with shotgun drawn. He hears someone rummaging around the corner behind the third cash register. Marshall leaps out with the rifle drawn and threatens to shoot the two young thugs. It was a young woman and a man, and both look up, but then the man goes back to emptying the cash register, taking his time completely unworried. The girl starts walking toward Marshall aggressively. I will shoot you, I will shoot you. While walking towards Marshall, the young woman pulls one of Mason Mart's damn big knives off of the rack, and Marshall thinks to himself, fuck that knife is big, and pulls the trigger, pumping her full of lead and sending her to the floor. As soon as her body hits the floor, it triples into 3 more of her, and each grabs something to beat him to death with. Marshall can't believe what he's seeing and starts blasting his shotgun, creating more of her. She goes to stab him, when suddenly, Marshall feels his brain release from reality, flooding him with a new perspective on life that he has never imagined. With inhuman reflexes, he grabs her knife-wielding wrist just before getting stabbed. With insane speed and precision, he punches her directly in her throat, then flips her into a wall. He then maneuvers through each of her reflections, neutralizing them until finally reaching the real her hidden behind the fold of light. She can't fathom how he can see her, but he does, and he kicks through her mirror-like body, shattering her into pieces. Marshall, under this sudden spell of absolute mental clarity, looks at himself in the reflection of her pieces, then looks around, taking in his surroundings. His brain felt limitless and was incredibly aware of his surroundings. Marshall has no idea what he just did. Marshall looks toward the man. Did I just kill this person? Was this even a person? The young thug screams out for his sister, draws and points his gun at Marshall. Whoa. Gunfire rings out, but by being overcome with his hypercognitive state and predisposed fighting instincts, Marshall dodges bullet after bullet while moving in on the shooter in his big-ass mascot costume. Grabs his gun hand and smashes it into his face, flips him up and onto the counter, and then drives his forearm into his noggin. Marshall accidentally strikes the man's soul self, killing him instantly. Marshall looks shook and does not understand what he just did or how he did it. But he did not like the idea of not having control. He looks at his hands and can see the soul essence staining his hands like he murdered a ghost. What was this? Marshall tries to regain his composure so this does not happen again. He looks up and sees a shadow of a person lurking by the entrance of his bodega. Besides from busted windows, Mason Mart was in pretty good shape, and he intended to keep it that way. Marshall leaps over the counter and rushes to protect his storefront. He tactfully engages the unknown stranger lurking about his door by swinging around the corner with a vicious hook, striking the man square in the eye, flooring him. Marshall immediately realizes he made a mistake, and his target was no enemy of his. Holding now a bruised black eye, we see a bald and bearded man in a long coat holding his eye with one hand and pointing his rifle with the other while cursing up a storm. It was Jacob Bastian, an elite contract merc from the Galgan district, who also happens to be great friends with Marshall, or so we thought. Fuck. Jacob's vision is blurred as he squints at Marshall in his big yellow mascot costume. Damn it, Marshall, I was coming to check up on you. We see the bruise under Jacob's eye completely heal. Marshall apologizes and asks him how the hell did he just heal his eye. When Jacob wasn't fulfilling contracts, he was protecting the innocent in his neighborhood from the world's ills, spawned within Anarchy's jungle that is Haven City. The gamma radiation from Grenfall has had some unique effects on some, and Jacob was no exception. Suddenly, a hail of bullets come flying toward Marshall and Jacob, but Marshall manages to react and pull them down behind a vehicle. Marshall is confused at the chaos and asks Jacob if all this is Survey Day's doing. Jacob explains to Marshall that a massive meteor is breaking up over the city and people seem to be mutating and going bananas. The Gate Center has agents out helping people, but not nearly enough agents, which is why he is out here. Marshall tells Jacob of how strange he feels, like feeling truly awake for the first time ever. He then asks Jacob if anything strange like this has happened to him as a result of the meteor. Jacob nods, but tells him this ain't a good time, as bullets begin to whiz by. Anarchy's androids have been capturing G-types, and have been pretty damn savage about it. 2 androids hop up on the vehicle and point their rifles, but before they could fire at Jacob, 2 androids hop up on top of the vehicle and points their rifles. But before they could, 2 androids hop up on top of the vehicle and point their rifles. But before they could fire, Jacob pulls out dual pistols loaded with ammo. 2 androids hop up on top of the vehicle and points their rifles. But before they could fire, Jacob pulls out dual pistols loaded with ammo he retrieved from the black market and fires several shots. The shells explode on impact. One causes an android to implode and the other disintegrates it in a part of the building behind him, next door to the Mesa Mart. Marshall hits Jacob over the head with his mascot arm. "Careful with where you're aiming those things." Jacob is a veteran of many wars of every type, from religious battles to wars over gang turf. And that was his justification for owning at least one of every type of gun. Jacob asks if Marshall has survivors in his panic room, and if so, they need to gather them and escort them safely to the gate agent outpost a few blocks away. We cut to Marshall leading his people out as Jacob fires his exotic rounds at oncoming androids being dropped from the sky. Jacob leads them down the street when he notices Marshall isn't following. Jacob beckons Marshall to hurry, but he declines. Happy Coyote Marshall stands in front of the Mesa Mart, his pride and legacy, and with all seriousness tells Jacob to take the civilians to the gate agents without him. Jacob reloads and nods. He knew Marshall for a long time and knows that he isn't leaving that store. Jacob believes in him and leads the civilians away. We zoom out as we see androids attack Marshall but fall to his combat prowess as he defends his shop. We cut to Eden, gathering enough spiritual power from his spells finally, and points his book at Selena, who is soaring through the air toward their vehicle. Selena bursts through the back window of the banged up vehicle, landing in the back seat. Selena summons an enchanted abyssal knife and plunges it into Kay McVeigh's seat and out the other end, but Kay McVeigh avoids it by phasing through the seat, letting go of the wheel, and then phases into a stranglehold with Selena, choking her with his Pioneer's whip. Selena still manages to threaten his well-being even while being strangled. "I will wear your entrails after crucifying you." Eden aims his open tome at Selena and blasts her with the raw eldritch energy unleashed from the cosmic scripture he invoked. Kay McVeigh phases out of the way as Selena is swallowed up by the wave of magic. We soon learn, though, that Selena has absorbed the entire attack all into her ancient medallion on her neck. Eden's jaw drops when he sees the fiendish woman laughing and showing her teeth. Selena pulls on the power she just absorbed from her medallion, and with glowing red hands plunges her hand through the bottom of the vehicle and rips out the entire back wheel, causing them all to swerve out of control and fly off of a bridge into buildings below, causing their car to explode. Kay McVeigh tries to reach for Eden, but it happened so fast he could only save himself by phasing out of the crashing vehicle. Everything goes black. We see Kay McVeigh phase back and begins looking over the rooftop at the terrible car wreck on flames, sitting by a massive shard of Grenfall. He knows there's no way Eden survived that, and when he sees Selena pull herself from the wreckage bent up and contorted, he leaves the scene. We see Selena gather herself and twists her head back around so it was facing the right direction. She then leans down and retrieves Eden's amulet that she was after off the ground. A powerful magical artifact to add to her collection, she thinks, while smiling. smiling. The smell of blood pleased her. Selena pulls and bends open the wreckage, revealing Eden laying impaled on 2 sharp pieces of car debris, poking up through his heart and his midsection. Eden lay dead as Selena approaches to retrieve the rest of his jewelry, when suddenly, Eden lets out a large and long exhale. His eyes glowing purple, and the flames of his vehicular gravesite also radiant with a hue of deep, majestic purple. Eden's mutation was awakening and causing an energy burnout, which saved his life. Selena, perplexed but not intimidated at the wounded rabbit, continues to close in for the jewelry, but now gets to kill him herself. She reaches out to him when suddenly a large horn violently bursts out of Eden's arm as he screams, coughing up blood. The purple flames intensify, and Eden is still barely conscious, hanging on to a strand of life. The purple flames brighten, and Eden's body begins to absorb the energies right out of Selena's own jewelry and everything around him. Her enchanted trinkets were important to her, and she wants absolutely nothing to do with these purple energies spawning from his body and siphoning the magic from her jewels. So Selena immediately backs up. Eden Hargrave gains full consciousness and sees Selena repulsed by his draining presence, and she immediately fades away into the abyss as not to subject her precious enchantments to his aura. Impaled upon scrap in the burning heap that was his vehicle, he turns and sees a shard of Grenfall planted in between an Atlas bank, fissuring it in half. Civilians can be seen running out of it with bags of credit sticks, only to be attacked by a maniacal G-type. Eden is thankful for the strange magic pouring out of him and making him incredibly exhausted. The intense exhaustion he felt was accompanied by a sharp tearing pain caused by the odd horn protruding out of his arm. What was this oddly familiar condition, and where is the nearest hospital? Grenfall's presence served its purpose in bringing data of previous cycles into the tank. Although Deftoo's sabotage and Rezanok's interception of it had completely compromised the plan, shards of Grenfall still rained from the sky, only a fraction of the shards containing data, as Rezanok had absorbed it all. However, some did, and its radiation was far-reaching. We see the instigator on his ship cruising toward a safe destination. He watches the events unfold through the satellite outposts outside of the planet's atmosphere. His eyes were removed from the city during Anarchy's takeover of it, a decision he never stood behind. Hours have gone by, and he has yet to receive communication from his brother, the Facilitator, a man rendered bodiless, a specter, after the instigator's experiment to turn him into a lich had gone wrong. The Facilitator has guarded the instigator's hidden phylactery for a millennia, as well as carried out a lot of dirty work by way of subterfuge. The instigator's one and only true ally, it seemed. He was livid over Grenfall's destruction and Deftoo's counter, and theft of lifetimes of hard work. This glowing red boy, who he had never noticed in the tank until now. How did he hide this child, he thought. The same way he hid himself, perhaps. The instigator makes it his first priority to re-establish connections with the Survey cult once he touches down. He turns to Myra, who we see recuperating from her wounds. The magical augmentation placed on her was merely an illusion so powerful that her own body believed it was on top of the world, but has long since wore off. He detects that she has Takena knowledge, and he can smell it on her. Perhaps she was a suitable apprentice, he thought. Who knows how powerful she can become when combining high-level Takena spells with stolen skill sets of her victims. The instigator manifests a monocle made of Takena emerald in between his fingertips and places it beside her for when she wakes up. He then speeds his ship up, and we watch it jet off toward Ray Lagar. We cut to Lord Bayrinth sitting, watching a hologram of the world. Fenton Miles and Survey elites await his command. He thinks to himself on what this giant meteor could be, but he doesn't want to blow his cover as the Green God incarnate. He has long heard Fenton's sermons preaching of coming calamities that will bless us. He has long heard Fenton's sermons preaching of coming calamities that will bless and curse the cattle, and through slaughter the ultimate will rise. This must be the calamity. The mutations must be the curses. Lord Bayrinth ponders if he will be a recipient of these so-called curses. Fenton Miles steps toward Lord Bayrinth and points out that the red glowing boy in the sky is unlike anything he's ever seen in any of the past lifetimes. Perhaps the chosen one has risen sooner than they thought this lifetime. Lord Bayrinth ignores him. He hasn't come this far up the Survey-Day hierarchy to rule peasants and mystified zealots. He wants to find who they pray to. Suddenly, Lord Bayrinth's mind gets scrambled and foggy as a sharp pain shoots through it. It was happening. The radiation in the Haven air had data for him as well, and his brain begins to mutate. Lord Bayrinth falls out of his chair and to his knees while clawing at his head, screaming. Thousands of visions fly through his head endlessly. Fenton Miles insists that he may be exhausted and calls for a sacrifice to be brought to him so he can feed. Lord Bayrinth's head shoots back, and his glassy blue eyes open wide as his brain gives him the most potent blast of clairvoyance beyond deja vu. He is flooded with the crystal clear view of the future relevant to his goal. Then the intensity normalizes and begins to feel like natural intuition. He gains his composure back and brings himself to his knees. Fenton pulls the sacrificial G-type closer to Lord Bayrinth. Lord Bayrinth pushes the sacrifice away and grabs Fenton by his hair and pulls him closer. Fenton Miles has been so psychologically fucked by Lord Bayrinth, he practically crumbles in his grip. Lord Bayrinth tells him that the gate is no longer an objective and tells him to redirect their course. We zoom into Lord Bayrinth's scarred eyes. He sees something. We cut to a middle school classroom inside of an Atlas facility in Central Haven. The kids are taking a test when suddenly the building rumbles. The kids look around scared and worried as an Atlas guard runs into the class and whispers into the teacher's ear. The teacher looks worried by the news that she got. The guard turns to the class and says, "Don't worry, kids, it's just a thunderstorm," then cocks his pistol and runs out of the classroom, slamming the door behind him. The teacher clears her throat and says, "Okay, kids, let's pause on the test and make it fun." She begins to ask a question when suddenly the same guard barges back into the room and presses the emergency ceiling mechanic that triggers an extra layer of Atlas steel to mobilize and secure the roof and walls. He then turns to the children. "Hey, like I said, kids, just a thunderstorm," as he presses a button on his chest that activates his Atlas armor. Then he jetpacks off into the hallway. The teacher goes and shuts the door behind him and gets the kids' attention again. She points the ruler at a young girl raising her hand to answer a question. Once the ruler targets them, the kid's name badge lights up with a bunch of cool colors, and the kid's score appears over their head. The kid shouts, "The Proctors!" The teacher claps and says, "Correct, Sherry. That's right. The Proctors watch people die for their enjoyment. Correct." Now for the follow-up question. What trial caused all of Glass's lower city androids to abandon all peaceful programming and become violent, aggressive, and mindless? A kid shouts out, "The Proto-Brythian Yordish War." All the kids laugh at his completely wrong answer, and a large spitball pelts him in the eye. Amelia Gale, Tempus's daughter, raises her hand, and the teacher points at her. Amelia profoundly says, "The glitch trial." The teacher applauds her extensive universe knowledge, and her score changes to 49,951, taking the lead over her classmate Bridget on the leaderboard. "That's right, Amelia. The villainous Another quake occurs, shaking the room and knocking the pencils off everyone's desks. Amelia was smart and asks the teacher why recess wasn't canceled yet if there's a storm. Recess was in 5 minutes. The teacher can't come up with a logical lie and begins to stutter when suddenly the Atlas steel ceiling begins to bubble and turn white hot as a ball of fire bursts through, crash landing through the teacher's desk. The fire dissipates, and standing in a circle of charred wood, we see Kai Excalibur possessed by the entity that dwells within him and steers his desires. The raging fire can be seen flickering in his eyes along with a green glow. All the children run to the back of the room frightened. Amelia bravely stands in front of them with her arms stretched. Kai Excalibur hears the voice in his head tell him that that's the girl. Kai turns to Amelia. And he feels compelled to protect her, as if it was his destiny to protect her. If that was the case, then Haven City is the last place she should be. Kai begins walking over to her, causing the desks in his path to erupt into flames from the heat exiting his thermosuit. A horde of Atlas guards enter the room and with their guns drawn, begin firing. That's right, Jeremiah's Atlas troop were master marksmen and it was impossible to misfire. The bullets all fly toward Kai's melon, but with one flex of a muscle, his suit sends a wave of heat that melts their bullets and turns their guns white hot, melting them into their hands, making it impossible for them to drop it. Kai opens up his arms, exposing his chest, causing an aberrant toxic fume to spray into their direction, causing them to choke and suffocate. Their eyes turn purple, and their faces get veiny and translucent, forcing them to their knees. Kai's genius rivaled Anarchy's in most aspects, and he too was capable of horrendous creations. Once the toxicity settles in their windpipes, we zoom into their bloodstreams and airways and see microscopic orange nanoworms that resembled caterpillars swimming about that then explode, causing a chain reaction amongst all of them, causing each Atlas guard choking to implode into flames. The teacher shrieks in terror. The entity in fire compels him to kill the teacher as well. But Kai refuses and continues to make his way toward Amelia when he notices one person left standing in the group of dead Atlas soldiers. Kai turns and sees a man in all-black modified battlesuit wearing a helmet resembling a skull, and in their arm was a high-powered assault rifle. Kai is confused as to how this man was unaffected by the toxic gas. With no words, the Skull Soldier aims his high-powered assault rifle and begins firing rounds at Kai's head, but are all blocked by Kai's barrier of flames. The Skull Soldier walks down his target and begins to jog, closing the distance, then drops his rifle, which magnetically attaches to his hip, and unsheathes 2 combat knives and rushes Kai. The Skull Soldier somersaults over the fire barrier, completely impervious to the heat, and comes down slashing vertically on Fire's face, then jump kicks him, sending him backward. Kai takes to the air, but the classroom didn't allow for too much airplay. Kai hurls powerful but smaller fireballs toward the Skull Soldier, but he easily evades them while running along the wall and power dives into Fire, tackling him out of the air. We see Fire falling in slow motion with the Skull Soldier's knees buried into his chest. They crash land into a desk and the Skull Soldier attempts to impale him, but Fire blasts him off and across the classroom and lands agilely on his feet. Fire jumps to his feet as well and is suddenly hit with 2 to 3 pretty large combat knives, landing and penetrating his chest, shoulder, and thigh, and soon the head, but he erects his fire barrier blocking it. The Skull Soldier can be seen running across the ceiling, defying gravity, while his arms appear as a blur from throwing knives, suppressing Kai in these closed quarters while closing the distance. Amelia watches in awe at their protector battling the fireman. She's never seen him at the gate center and wonders if her father knows of him. She was dramatically impressed, and this moment will change Amelia's life forever. Kai upholds his barrier and begins flying again. The Skull Soldier retrieves a special double-edged knife shaped almost like a boomerang. He then lobs a grenade up into the air over Fire's barrier. Fire sees it and goes to blast it with his heat. But just before he can, the bladed boomerang knife comes twirling across the room, captures and carries the grenade, completely changing its trajectory. Kai misses his blast and looks all around the room for the boomerang, but it was too late. By then, the boomerang comes making its way around behind Fire with its pin pulled from the momentum and explodes right behind his head. Kai takes the brunt of the explosion, sending him flying, but for the most part absorbed the blast into his own flames, making it non-lethal. Kai tries to gain composure when suddenly the Skull Soldier lays into him with an elbow across the face, another spinning elbow vertically across his face, followed by a punch to the gut, causing Kai to bend over, a jaw-crushing uppercut that shatters his helmet visor into pieces. Then a knife gets plunged into Kai's belly. Skull Soldier then kicks the knife in, sending Kai falling backward onto the floor under the hole in the ceiling. The Skull Soldier presses a button on his helmet that triggers the ignition of all of Anarchy's swarm bots crawling on him from the laced grenade he threw earlier, causing dozens of mini-contained explosions to pepper Kai Excalibur's body, while simultaneously giving the remote signal to the android helicopter now hovering over the facility that begins raining down ultra-high-powered rounds through the hole in the ceiling, ripping through Kai as he explodes from the swarm bots. The smoke clears, and we see Kai incapacitated in the middle of the room, smoking. The smoke clears, and we see Kai Excalibur incapacitated in the middle of the room with a ripped up suit and flesh in critical condition. The soldier calls and has androids swiftly dive in and capture the near-dead Kai, places him on a copter, and leaves the scene. Amelia tugs on the Skull Soldier's arm. He turns and looks down at her. Through his vision, he reads her vital signs while simultaneously checking the entire Atlas facility's status to see if they're all clear. We see various other Atlas facilities on his HUD that appear to have been protected and secured in the past hour by him, all green labeled secured. The Skull Soldier walks toward the middle of the room, calls down a metal rope from another aircraft, and is airlifted out of the building. As he flies through the air on the rope, Hala reporting in, Atlas assets are safe, returning to Sector 12. We see Jeremiah in full-out mechanized battle armor suit, issuing orders and commands to the leaders of his privatized troop, who then issue commands to the fearless and exceptionally trained Atlas Gate soldiers. The muscle in Jeremiah's arsenal of what can only be obtained with wealth and power. Jeremiah's troop can be seen rescuing gamma types who have not yet mutated from those who have decided to use their mutation to harm. Their weapons were advanced enough to battle the average G-Type 1, and so they have been a powerful supplement to Tempus's Gate agents. Experienced and trained G-Type 1s who have received their mutations an alternate way, and so have had some time with their abilities. They were directed by Tempus to assist and protect those who mutate. It can be a jarring transition, but also a great opportunity to see the true heart of a person, and maybe the perfect Gate agent. Jeremiah makes sure all of the resources he pours into Atlas Gate is being utilized and are efficient. Suddenly, a large brolic woman with a massive beard comes leaping up onto the Atlas tank Jeremiah and his guards are standing on. The surrounding Gate agents come under fire by more rogue G-types and chaotic gang members who follow them. A full-out three-way battle. Jeremiah's guards fire their high-powered Atlas rifles at the woman, but the wiry beard was capturing all of the bullets and absorbing the impact to power its diesel humanoid mech. The Beard Gundam opens its hand up and begins blasting thousands of little people, no longer than a finger, at them. They crash into the guard's face and body, pulling and stabbing at their eyelids and soft spots with mini vibro knives. This immediately disables them as they begin to swat them away in confusion. Jeremiah holds up a shield of hard light from his armored suit as the bodies crash into it. Their little necks can be heard snapping as they topple over one another. One of his bodyguards shout in pain and collapse to their knees, covered in people stabbing him. The vital signs for him flatlines on Jerry's battle visor. The other guard manages to gain composure and begins doing what he can to protect Jeremiah and fires his rifle at the little people crawling under his shield. Jerry tells his guard to look out as the beard Gundam bear hugs him from behind and begins to electrocute him with its charged up beard. Jeremiah then sees his other guard stand up straight, as if unbothered by the little people who now seem to just be falling off of him dead. The guard casually wipes and pulls the little people off of him as they die to the touch. Jerry is confused. He thought he was dead. Suddenly, his other guard catches on red-hot flames burning off all of his clothes. The beard Gundam lets him go and backs off to extinguish its beard. The guard immediately rushes forward and reaches into the beard, burning through it, and tears it off, exposing an entire bridge of small people sitting in chairs piloting the beard Gundam. They get up and begin running, but the bodyguard's burning hand comes sweeping and clearing off the entire deck of them, incinerating them on contact. One, dressed in a green suit, manages to dive out of the mech. We see it front flip over the camera and land. It pulls out a flute and attempts to summon something, but is picked up by the bodyguard, killing it on contact. The guard dangles it in front of his eye, trying to figure out what in the fuck. Jeremiah looks at his two bodyguards, perplexed at how they mutated. He then calls into Tempus to see how everything is looking on his end. We see Tempus looking down from the jet at the janitor, dying in the bus fire, attempting to save the life of the two girls. It was decisions like this that weighed heavy on Tempus's soul. He could easily manipulate time and save them, but it was what happens next is what saves the city. The janitor bursts out of the bus and grows into a gigantic 7-story hybrid abomination and living ruin. Her entire physiology consists of junk vehicles, remnants of Anarchy's androids, and random debris found in Haven, all held and intertwined with telekinetic forces. Tempus has seen the types of gamma fiends Grenfall can make. He believes the key to defeating the Servidae once and for all is to use what they created against them. And that was us, the G-types. If he can tame the gamma fiend's G-type side, he could communicate with it. Something never done before, but with Tempus's unparalleled empathic ability, he could be the one to do it. Tempus radios back to Jeremiah and tells him everything is going as planned. Then he leaps out of the jet and free falls toward the city and the janitor. We cut back to Jeremiah, who receives word that a group of civilians need to be escorted toward a gate outpost and that he is the closest. Jeremiah signals to his guards to follow them as he runs through the streets, firing his arm cannons at hostiles and shielding his guards from gunfire. We see Jacob Bastian spraying an assault rifle with one hand and pointing a holo targeter with the other. Once he sets the targeter, he crouches behind the vehicle and tells the civs to get down. He pulls a teeny metal ball off of his belt, bounces it once as it transforms into a giant spiked mine hovering in place. He then presses a button on it and it zips up and over the vehicle, blowing up an entire block of incoming androids. He then picks up his other rifle and tells them to begin following him. We cut to Jerry O firing his arm cannons while running, shooting androids off of rooftops and thugs out of their drive-by vehicles. We cut to Jacob Bastian firing with precision and every bullet an exotic piece of artillery landing true. We see two frames, one of each, both doing badass shit. Then they collide in the middle of the street back to back, shooting down enemies while protecting the civilians that Jacob brought. Jeremiah has his guards defend as he talks to Jacob. Jeremiah thanks Jacob for protecting the civilians and leads him to the gate outpost down the street to drop them off. Jacob turns and heads back out into the streets, but Jeremiah stops him to ask him why he's leaving. Jacob laughs. I ain't staying here. He pulls out a shotgun with a silenced missile launcher under the barrel, cocks it, and then darts off. Jeremiah is given word that reinforcements are needed in the Galgan district immediately. Jerry turns and sees several squads of approaching androids. He turns to his guards and tells them to guard the outpost. Jeremiah then leaps up into the air and ignites his jet boots and flies up and over the buildings into the sky. From this view, we see destruction, but also hope, as gate agents can be seen saving people and defeating their opponents. Jerry sees the glowing red buoy in the sky amidst the swirling shards of Grenfall gravitating around him. He pulls away from his distraction and flies over to the neighboring Golgan district. Jerry lands amidst a chaotic street filled with gangs, mercenaries, and gate agents all fighting each other. The camera sits behind Jeremiah's shoulder in third-person view. From here, we watch him jogging through the street of Golgan. He fires both arm cannons at once, taking out a larger hostile attacking an innocent civilian. Atlas soldiers join his side and provide cover fire to his left, suppressing gunmen. Jerry calls in a missile strike that takes out 5 weaponized mercenary armored tanks. His visor alerts him of an invisible enemy that decapitates one of his soldiers' heads standing beside him, giving Jerry enough time to spin around and fire 2 blasts to their chest, then a double blast blowing his head off. More gate forces arrive to Jerry's aid from out of the building as they were waiting for reinforcements. A flying G-type comes soaring across the sky with a katana and decapitates several Atlas guards. Jerry aims his cannon, but his hand is blasted with a projectile that changes the density of his hand, making it too heavy to lift and aim. Looper Ken arrives at Jerry's side and tells him to get down, and he does as another projectile comes zipping by their heads, missing. Looper pokes his head back up and fires his high-caliber pistol from 30 yards out at the shooter up in the window. Headshot. Looper smashes the device apart that was attached to Jerry's hand, restoring functionality again. The flying G-type lands on the roof and looks for its next target. Just as it goes to dive and swoop down, his body is clipped by a flying hover bike that leaves him spinning in the air and trying to get the wind back under his wings when suddenly he looks up and coming down on him at lightning speed, Shiro Aoi slashes down vertically, opening up his chest with a sword of ice, then slashes across his belly with the same sword as it morphs into fire, setting his entire body ablaze, then finishes the flying G-type with 2 kicks that drop him out of the sky into 2 burning pieces. Shiro then hits the ground like a flash of lightning, then splits into 3 lightning clones, killing 3 hostile and powerful G-types approaching from the west. Jeremiah uses his jet boots to leap over a vehicle and protects a family from gunfire. Looper shoots the gun out of the attacker's hand and then sends a bullet into his chest, then head. Pat, pat. A big, strong G-type comes from behind Looper and whacks him over the head with the fire hydrant it ripped from the ground, sending him flying into a vehicle. Looper, slightly disoriented, wonders how the fuck he's alive after that. He thinks, well damn, ordinaries are tough, but shit. He taps his head looking for blood and finds none. Looper shakes it off and points his gun, but has it knocked out of his hand when he is hit in the head again when the G-type throws the fire hydrant. This sends Looper to the ground. He gets back up disoriented and goes to rip off the door of a car for cover, but stops when he sees a woman hiding in the back seat. Looper sighs and limps across the street to divert attention away from her as the G-type tackles Looper to the ground and begins pummeling him. Looper blocks most of the strikes, but takes some powerful blows to the head. In the background, we see a squad of gate agents surrounding another big G-type, shooting it as it swipes at Shiro, who evades by turning into a water form, then blasts the G-type with water only to impale its head with a sword of lightning, shocking it to death. Looper sees this and wonders when the hell did Shiro learn to do that, and wonders if he's seen things. Maybe a concussion. Looper flips over and wrestles with the G-type, managing to get on top of him and begins throwing his own blows. The first punch knocks out his teeth, the second breaks his face, knocks him unconscious. Motherfucker. Looper gets up and cracks his back. He catches up with Jerry and Atlas forces marching down the street, clearing the district from the street level. We see Shiro up on the roof watching from above, trying not to stay in the spotlight. He too looks intrigued by his new abilities. Jeremiah thanks Looper for their assistance and tells him that he and his friends would make great gate agents. Looper goes, sure, I'll take an Iron Man suit in the 6X. Jeremiah suddenly gets alerted to a large enemy approaching. We see the We see, not no one else. The facilitator flying through the streets attempting to lose the trail of the Wraith Chimera on its back. The facilitator phases through a building, baiting the Chimera through. Looper, Ken, Shiro, Jeremiah, and all of the gate forces looks around when they hear something large approaching, followed by a loud metal shriek. The Wrath Chimera bursts through a row of Gulgan buildings and is immediately fired upon by gate forces. The Wraith Chimera slams its tail into the building, knocking Shiro off of the roof, then blasts the entire street of gate agents with napalm lava. Just before the lava lands on them all, a massive snake made of dark chi energy dives in the way, protecting everyone. It was Void Makai's Nibu Basilisk, almost larger than the Chimera itself. The Basilisk lets out a planet-shaking roar that ends with a dry hiss. The Wrath Chimera's gigantic ultra-sharp claws dice through the Basilisk's head, but the Basilisk's head reforms and wraps itself around the Chimera, constricting it. We cut to Void Makai soaring through the sky, fully empowered by the deep reserves of endless death chi. Engulfed in a nova of purple chi, Void Makai crashes through an android command ship, zigzagging in and out of it, causing the ship to crumble and begin to crash. Void Makai bursts into the hangar, dips under a B2 brawler's swing, and sends 2 demolishing punches, blowing it up without losing his momentum, and then bursts through the other end of the ship again. His veins glow purple, and death can be seen permeating from his dreads as he turns and flies back into the ship's engine core room. He is attacked by another B2 brawler who lunges with an attack that Void Makai instantly dissects and counters it, resulting in a strike that blows the machine up. Void Makai uses the momentum of his punch and rolls into an attacking nomad and leg sweeps it low, then double spin kicks all 3 of its floating orbs high, then lands on the floored nomad with an explosive knee that sends them both flying into the engine core, then lands on the floored nomad with an explosive knee that sends them both flying into the engine core, nearly destroying it. Void Makai finishes the job, then erupts with chi that causes the whole aircraft to break apart and be obliterated. Void Makai falls from the sky, then summons another Nibu Chi Basilisk that he begins to run downward toward the Gulgan district, where he sees Shiro and Looper supporting Gate. He then leaps off of the Basilisk toward the Chimera, constricted by his other Chi beast, and with glowing fists of pure dark Chi, Void Makai lands a blow directly to this Wrath Chimera's dome, causing a massive explosion of death energy that blows through and melts away the creature's metal, thought to be impenetrable. Void Makai unleashes a 20-hit combo on the naked Chimera, with strikes that create thunderous claps heard from several districts away. The Chimera falls to the ground, now just a husk of machinery. Void Makai steps down off of it and begins walking toward Jeremiah. The two have never met, but Jeremiah goes to greet Void Makai. Void Makai asks Jeremiah where Tempus is. It's an emergency. Jeremiah gets ready to patch into Tempus when suddenly the Wrath Chimera begins to glow and prepare to explode. And it does, causing a ginormous napalm bomb to self-destruct from within its heart. One last countermeasure to eradicate whatever G-type it was trying to capture. Or so it would have. The blinding light from the explosion fades, and what stands in its place is a massive glowing bubble filled with napalm that had contained the entire explosion. Standing in between the bubble and gate reinforcements, we see a man with unkempt hair and facial hair that hasn't been groomed for ages. Dressed in a tattered lab coat with a solar-powered backpack strapped to it, he stands with one hand extended outward, controlling the shape and strength of the bubble with sheer willpower. His hands and feet glow and pulse with golden energy, but are partially wrapped and covered in bandages. Jeremiah steps to him, but unlike the others, he is not happy to make his acquaintance. He recognized this man. Nivell Threndorn was an enemy. one of Anarchy's scientists who helped reverse engineer mutations into the deadly weapons that made his android so lethal today. Grenfall tells Jeremiah not to be alarmed and that he comes in peace. He explains that he was a futurist and aligned with Anarchy's philosophy of survival of the fittest, but once he learned of Anarchy's hunting and handling of G-types, he disbanded and fled years ago, living in the streets of Haven, hiding from his Gorgon bots. Jeremiah looks him up and down and believes him. Shit. Grenfall offers his assistance to Gate, and though Jeremiah believes him now, he tells the gate guards to watch him closely. Grenfall deactivates the bubble when suddenly Shiro shouts for him to place the bubble back fast, as a Kalidian, a race of cannibalistic underground dwellers, comes crawling out of the hole caused by the explosion just before Grenfall places the bubble back. The Kalidian was no normal Kalidian. In addition to its translucent flesh, gaunt and veiny physique, it was glowing green and clearly infected by the gamma radiation. Something was clearly wrong, as Kalidians never come to the surface, but this one was raging mad. It charges toward the group at high speed, but two Shiro clones come dashing across it high and low, dicing it into two pieces with ice swords. Jeremiah, Shiro, Grenfall, and Looper approach the bubble and look into it and see the entire underbelly of the district is filled with gamma zombie Kalidians trying to make their way up to the surface. Jeremiah is astonished at an entire population infected with gamma radiation. No matter how undesirable of a species they were a civilization nonetheless. Now what? We cut to the janitor swinging her arms, trying to swat at enemy G-types with their own motives for attacking her. Her gigantic arms of ruin fly toward a bridge filled with people stuck in traffic and doomed to die there when suddenly Tempus slows time for a soft landing on the janitor's hand, and with one flex of willpower, Tempus absorbs time from the janitor's hands, causing all of the junk and debris to decay and weather away, essentially disintegrating it before it could make impact to the bridge, saving everyone. The janitor then begins to wildly flail around, reacting to the great agony it feels from the effects of the transformation. Tempus manages to reallocate all of the time he absorbed from it before and pours that into a temporal anomaly that slows the janitor's body to a standstill when it comes rushing into the bridge, all while absorbing time from its midsection, turning it into smaller pieces of debris that doesn't cause as much damage to the people as its normal body would have. The janitor goes rampaging through the bridge, literally reforming its body back once on the other side. Tempus wipes his forehead. Only a few people died from pieces of stray debris hitting them and killing them on impact. Tempus spots one of the G-types flying around the janitor's head, antagonizing him. Tempus pours time into their heart, causing it to skip beats and fail from the excitement they're having, sending them flying out of the sky into the water, then brings their heart back to its normal age and allocates that time back into his right hand. A G-type with multiple arms hired to assassinate Tempus leaps up on the car and begins firing their assault rifles at him. Tempus turns the dials of time and sends the flying debris back across the area they are standing in, causing a massive concrete block to clobber them, killing them. An assassin creeps up from behind Tempus and begins screaming with supersonic intensity into his ears, but Tempus captures the sound waves in a wall of frozen time, then punches the man in the stomach and judo flips him over his back into the wall of excruciating sound waves, causing the man's brain to explode. Tempus runs after the janitor, who is now stampeding to another city block. We see a family running for their lives from the janitor, who is blinded by rage and pain and is getting ready to trample all over them when suddenly a wall of concrete lifts up in front of the family, causing the janitor to fall over, but is caught by a massive hand made of mud that grabs the janitor and pushes him backward into the water by the bridge. The janitor falls in and is immediately subdued by two large arms made of water, putting it in an arm lock. The family looks up and sees the island girl, Epony, cheesing extra hard, having a blast using her new gamma mutations. The janitor breaks into small pieces, slipping through the water, and transfers its conscious into buildings surrounding Epony, causing them to come collapsing down onto her. But she grabs the family and teleports up onto a building rooftop at a safe distance. She places them down and tells them how she is from the Oceania 1000 Islands and how she will bring light to this dark city. She pushes the kid's shoulder and promises him that shit. She then gives him a big thumbs up and teleports over to the edge of the building, leaps off onto a slide made of ice that throws her up into the air and into a flying kick surrounded by a powerful funnel of wind that crashes into the janitor, sending it stumbling back. Epony free falls, and behind her we see the janitor's leg coming to kick her, but a massive hawk comes soaring across the sky and grabs her, taking her out of the way. Epony flips off of the bird toward the janitor again, turning her own body into stone and cannonballing through the janitor and out the other side of it and into a building. Epony rolls and then runs to leap out of the window for another attack, but steps into a temporal anomaly that freezes her in place as Tempus comes swinging into the hole she created with a kick to her face, sending her flying back. Epony looks up and sees the rugged Tempus, his all-white clothes dirty and tattered from the day of war. Epony teleports. Tempus stops time, moves to the side, starts time, evading her teleporting kick and chops her in the neck. Then goes to judo flip her, but she turns into stone as his hip crashes into her, hurting him. Then in what seems like a sexy dance move, Epony's massive, curvy, thick legs whip across his face, knocking his hat off. He captures it, puts it on, then ducks under her next kick, then her next kick, then her next kick, then sees a glimpse of the future again and absorbs time from the floor behind him, making it brittle. As Epony kicks at him again, she lands on the area and falls completely through. But Tempus rewinds time, pulling her back up and uses the momentum to judo slam her onto the floor. Epony hits the ground hard, tumbles, and rolls, but then jumps back up to her feet, nimble and barefoot and just getting started. Tempus realizes she is a powerful G-type and there aren't too many ways to deal with powerful G-types that didn't involve flat out killing them. Tempus shouts out to Epony, telling her to stop. He nor the janitor are her enemy. Epony shouts back that she will protect and save everyone in Haven from that monster. Tempus can see her raging passion and genuine care for the people of Haven exploding from her words like confetti. However, she didn't see the grand scheme like Tempus did, and he knows it would be too complex to explain. So Tempus uses his empathic ability to see if he can convey his feelings to her in a way that explains the dire circumstances and his need for her to trust him. Tempus asks her to stop attacking it because it was a person just like her but had mutated differently. Epony understands exactly what he means as he emotionally connects with her, his willpower striking her logic. Suddenly, a loud explosion happens outside. Tempus and Epony run over and see Jacob Bastian on a roof, pushing down a big lever set up beside him, setting off a massive bomb he somehow attached to the janitor. Tempus sighs and asks Epony to take him over to him. Jacob loads another missile onto his shotgun when Tempus and Epony appear in front of him. He aims and fires, but Tempus stops the gunfire in place along with him and asks him to cease fire. Jacob lowers his gun and asks what's going on and why not take down the thing that's destroying the city. He's confused. Tempus brings him up to speed on his plan. We cut to Epony distracting the janitor with her teleportation and nature manipulation as Tempus stands on the roof focusing his empathic power to communicate with the mind of the janitor. We cut to Epony distracting the janitor with her teleportation and nature manipulation as Tempus stands on the roof focusing his empathic power to communicate with the minds of the janitor, all while Jacob protects him from anyone else. The mind of one person was easy to reach, but it took the amount of willpower Tempus had to reach and tame a being made up of three minds going mad. A few times the janitor almost struck down Tempus' building, ruining his concentration, but Epony was able to lure the janitor away. Finally, Tempus breaks through and begins to soothe the janitor, and she stops attacking. The janitor turns to and looks at Tempus, who shouts out that they are not its enemy, and he can stop the pain Tempus explains what she's going through, and because he knows much about the transformation, he is able to relate with her. He then talks her through the motions of relaxing her mind from the racing thoughts and manages to stop its rampage. We flash forward to massive Atlas Gate ships filled with scientists and builders to come and tend to the janitor. We see Tempus speaking with gate agents and leaders being briefed with great news about the majority of the city being secured. Though Tempus can't figure out why the survey day pulled out and didn't disrupt his plan as he thought they would, he was thankful that it unfolded this way. Tempus and Jeremiah are surrounded with reporters trying to get the scoop from the heroes of Haven City, as well as gain clarity on why people were mutating, an effect everyone always associated with the Gate Center. Reporters inquire if they were responsible for the meteor and the glowing red boy in the sky. Tempus informs them that it had nothing to do with Gate, but they will surely continue to address the threat. A reporter jumps in and asks a question that would spark a controversial debate in what Haveners believe going forward. Live on air, the reporter asks Tempus that if people have been able to mutate without the Gate agent's assistance, does this mean that there are indeed other ways for people to become G-types? Tempus is somewhat speechless because he didn't have all the answers in that regard. He had no idea what just happened and why it happened. This cycle has unfolded completely different from previous cycles. The reporter says, well, I will interpret that silence as a yes, and then proceeds to ask that if that is the case, then there is a great possibility Dr. Skriller's panic theory could be valid, yes? Jeremiah interrupts the barrage of questions and tells all the reporters that they will be taking no more questions, and that Tempus is exhausted. The reporters get antsy and all begin to shout out questions until Jeremiah's big-ass bodyguards put themselves in between them. Tempus turns away when a hand grabs his shoulder. Tempus turns around and sees a big, Nebunese man. It was Void Mackay. Jeremiah introduces him to Tempus, but Void Mackay interrupts and tells him that they already know each other. Void Mackay shows him a photo of Tempus, Mackay, the Smaven CEO, and R-Type X at the Gate Center's fundraiser from the previous cycle. Tempus sees this photo and immediately knows this photo is from a past cycle, as Mackay and R-Type had been seemingly missing from history since then. Jeremiah sees the photo and does not recall either of these two men at the Gate Center's fundraiser. Tempus can't believe it and asks Void Mackay if it's really him. Void Mackay nods and shows Tempus a picture of Amelia's sister, Serenity, that he had. Tempus smiles. You really have been gone for a long time, friend. Tempus shows Void Mackay an updated picture of Serenity Funoichi, now 14 years old. A young Nebu diplomat standing with Tempus and other diplomats in Nebu. Tempus tells Void Mackay that he has protected her and supported Nebu in his absence. What is left of Void Mackay's heart is filled with appreciation and gratitude, and the two shake hands and hug. The last time he saw his daughter, she was an infant. The last time he saw Tempus, he was buried alive by the light. Tempus explains to Void Mackay everything, and how he was able to retrieve memories of previous cycles. Void Mackay asks if he has seen R-Type X. Tempus shakes his head no. The two look up into the sky at the glowing red boy. Tempus tells Mackay that the Gate Center will be needed more now than in any previous cycle. Epony, Jacob Bastion, Nivell Threndorn, Looper and Shiro walk up to them. Tempus invites all of them to the Gate Center to meet in private and discuss the truth of their world, the evil cult that manipulates it, and the call to action to save Haven. Suddenly a voice shouts out, "Yeah, but it's bigger than just the cultists." Everyone turns around and sees Tempus Gray standing there in his gray hoodie over his messy black hair. Shiro shoots over behind him in the form of a lightning bolt, but Tempus vanishes from his sight. Shiro looks around, but the others still see him. Tempus restores the sliver of light that he denied from Shiro's eyes and tells him that he comes in peace. Shiro's clone dissipates. Tempus tells Tempus Gray that nothing is bigger than the cultists. Tempus says, well, yeah, remember when nothing was bigger than this planet, then we discovered space. Makai laughs to himself. The Nibunese discovered space decades ago. Tempus informs him that he has some info that they want. Tempus asks him what his name is. Tempus doesn't reply. Tempus notices that Tempus is zoned out, staring at something. Everyone turns to where he is looking, which seems to be what Jeremiah's bodyguard is clutching in his hands. It was the beard, ripped straight from the Beard Gundam. Tempus asks Tempus to snap out of it. He can see terrible black shapes form around his head, symbolizing great and intense trauma. Tempus shudders and snaps back. We zoom in on his muddy yellow eyes and tells him that his name is Gray. We cut to the instigator's ship flying over Monster Island off of the coast of the Raylagarian mainland. An island buried in conspiracy and legends to the Raylagarian people. Legends that were true. The island was indeed home to terrible manifestations of darkness and tainted wildlife, making it the perfect location for one of the instigator's hideouts. The instigator wakes up Myra and tells her that they have arrived to their destination. We cut to the instigator and Myra walking down the ramp of his ship parked in a clearing of the foggy Raylagarian jungle. The instigator waves his hand, causing the hidden Survey facility entrance to rise from the ground, revealing itself. The instigator takes a step, then stops. Myra adjusts her new monocle so she can see clearly because she swore she thought she saw a person standing in the... The instigator takes a step back and looks all around him as Survey ships uncloak in the clearing around them as elite Survey cultists surround them. Lord Bayrinth exits the instigator's hideout with Fenton Miles trailing behind him at his side. Lord Bayrinth smiles. He was happy to learn that his foresight was indeed accurate. Surrender, false prophet. Your true God has arrived to reclaim his legacy, Bayrinth says. We see a close-up of the instigator's eyes. Then we cut to a close-up of Lord Bayrinth's.
Thanks for watching Peoplz and Dragons, the interactive RPG game show. I encourage everyone to jump into our comment section to participate in the lore contests, as well as visit our Patreon page to learn what perks come with your support for our machine. Peace.
We see Anarchy's carrier ship heading towards Sector 12. We cut to Kai Excalibur laying on a table bound in Anarchy's nullification bands. Kai Excalibur's eyes open, filled with green flame. His flesh wounds begin to burn and cauterize with green fire. The nullification bands catch ablaze and melt off of him. He sits up out of his table, appearing completely consumed by the entity within. We cut away and see Anarchy's carrier ship from afar explode, filling the sky with green flames.